Pesach, the Seder, is an amazing event. It is probably the oldest continuously observed ritual in the world, in which Jews have been observing this for thousands of years all over the world. If you look at Haggadot, there are Haggadot literally from all over the world, every single community, and you can look at the illustrations of the Haggadot, and you can see Jews in Italy observing it in the 17th century. You can see a Haggadah from Pune in India, translated into Marathi, the Indian dialect of Pune. You can see Haggadot printed in Spain in the early 15th century before the expulsion. You can see pictures. I saw one Spanish Haggadah, 1400s, in which there's a picture of a lady with a broom sweeping the ceiling. Nothing has changed whatsoever. Right? So it is pretty amazing. But I think if we would ask most people, what is the central message of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of the Exodus? What is the central message of the Haggadah? I think we'd probably have a lot of different views. Some people would say it's about freedom. Some people would say it's about liberty from oppression, the overthrowing of the bourgeoisie by the proletariat, if Karl Marx was reading the Haggadah. We would have different opinions about this. It's interesting. There's a few hints as to what one of the main messages, I think probably the main message of the Exodus is about. First of all, we know that when God introduced himself to the Jewish people on Mount Sinai, and he gave us the 10 Commandments and the entire Torah, but the 10 Commandments on the tablets, he starts off by identifying himself as Anochi, Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God. How does it continue? Who took you out of the land of Egypt. It does not say, I am God who created heavens and earth. It does not say, I am God who created time, space, and matter. It does not say, I am God who created everything. Why not? Aren't they more impressive? Why does it start with this parochial, nationalistic, specific, particularist, and other synonyms of the Jewish people getting out of Egypt? God could have said, I am God who created everything. Instead, I am God who took you out of the land of Egypt. That is interesting. That tells us that obviously the Exodus is something very central, incredibly central to the encounter with God, to our relationship with God, incredibly central to our relationship as Jews to each other, to the world, because otherwise, how could God begin with something which is trivial? Would he begin with something which is incidental? No. Obviously, he introduces himself with his primary identification feature, which is, I am God who took you out of Egypt. Let us try to examine what is that primary feature of the Exodus that we are concerned with here. So, first of all, the code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch, mentions at the very beginning of the laws of Passover, very beginning of the laws of Pesach, mentions that it is customary at the beginning of the month to collect kimcha de pischa. That's Aramaic. It means flour for Pesach. It is customary to collect money for the poor to ensure that they have matzah, they have food for Pesach. It is interesting to note that before Sukkot, the Code of Jewish law does not say it is customary to collect money to ensure that everyone will have a lulav and an etrog and a sukkah. It does not say that. It does not say before Rosh Hashanah that it's customary to collect money so that everyone will have honey and challah. It doesn't say that. I mean, probably because Jewish charity organizations and the obligation of tzedakah, charity, is something which includes all of these events. But it's specifically on Pesach, on Passover, that the Torah tells us, the Code of Jewish law rather, tells us to specifically get together to collect money to ensure that no one should go without the needs of Pesach. That is hint number one. Number two, how do we start the Seder? How do we start the Seder? We say, well, obviously there is Kiddush, but we also say, Ha lachma anya, this is the bread of affliction, bread of poverty, probably because of the price, so it reduces most people to poverty. But I mean, I think at $40 a pound, it's hardly bread of poverty. I mean, this is, but okay, whatever. Right, so we say this is the bread of poverty, which our forefathers ate, etc. And then we say, Kol dichvin yetei v'yechol. Anyone who is hungry, come and eat. Kol ditzrich, anyone who needs, yetei v'yivsach, come and partake of our Passover. We begin the Seder with an invitation to people who are hungry, to people who are in need. That's how we begin the Seder. That's very interesting. So we begin the laws of Passover, laws of Pesach, with an obligation to get money for people who don't have enough money for Pesach. This is over and above our regular tzedakah, our regular charity, obviously, because otherwise it would be included in the regular charity. You would not need a special custom, a special law. Isn't that normal to collect money for people who need it? But there's a special rule here on Pesach. That is, so hint number two, we start with an invitation. In addition to this, if we look throughout the Torah, prophets and writings, the Tanakh, we look throughout the Tanakh, we will find that the whole idea of the Exodus, is mentioned many, many times. Many times. And it's mentioned in many different contexts. But it's interesting to note that I think, from a brief survey done with my incredible brain that was able to go on to Bar Ilan Judaica program and do a survey, I found that the majority of places where the Torah mentions the Exodus, it mentions it regarding being fair to those who are weaker than us, not cheating people who are at a disadvantage, not oppressing people who are at a disadvantage, the widow, the orphan, the poor, the stranger, the customer, etc. Many, many times the Torah says this. It says, for example, do not cheat people in your weights and measures. When you measure something, don't cheat because God took you out of Egypt. It says, don't charge interest because God took you out of Egypt. It says, do not lie in business because God took you out of Egypt. We are told, don't oppress the stranger because you were strangers in Egypt. Don't oppress the widow and the orphan and the poor because you were oppressed in Egypt. Fascinating. And throughout the books of the prophets, the Nevi'im, our prophets tell us very similar ideas. Yirmiyahu, Micha, when they talk about the Exodus, when they talk about the ideas of the Exodus, they talk about it in terms of justice, charity, tzedakah, mishpat, etc. Very, very interesting. We also know that at the very beginning of the Seder, there's something else we do which is a little strange. A lot of strange things we do at the Seder. But one of the strange, Jews do strange things often. It doesn't, but whatever. Right. So one of the strange things we do is we take vegetable, a piece of vegetable, karpas, and we dip it in salt water. People familiar with that? Dip karpas, vegetable, in salt water. Why do we do this? It's a very, very strange type of custom. You dip a piece of vegetable into the salt water and you eat a small amount of it, and that's it. And then you don't eat for another hour or two, whatever. You know, it depends how long you go. But basically you dip the vegetable. What? And the word karpas is a strange word. The word karpas only turns out is mentioned only once in the entire 24 books of the Bible. The word karpas is only mentioned once. Anyone know where it's mentioned? Gosh, you're doing very well, right? Gryffindor, 10 points. What was that? Yes, Megillat. Yeah, in Megillat Esther, in the scroll of Esther, we are told that in the palace of Achashverosh in Susa, Shushan, Persia, the palace of Achashverosh was adorned for the party was adorned with all types of decorations. Amongst them, it does not mention balloons, shockingly, but there are other decorations mentioned. And amongst the decorations are fabric that was hung up. Chur, white fabric. Karpas, green fabric. Utchelet, and blue fabric. So karpas is mentioned once the entire Bible, and it refers not to a vegetable, but it refers to fabric, green fabric. A little strange. So Rashi, who you're all familiar with, Rashi, the great biblical commentator, also commentary on the Talmud, etc. One of my kids came home from school once, asked him, what'd you learn about today? He said, nothing, it's usually true. I said, no, really, what'd you do? He said, we learned about Rashi. I said, what'd you learn about Rashi? He said, we learned that he lived during recess. I said, what are you talking about? What did the teacher say? He said, he lived from 1040 to 1105. So yeah, no Nobel Prizes there. Okay, anyway, so basically, Rashi tells us that when the brothers of Joseph, when they sold Joseph, before they sold him, what happened? They said, here is the guy with the coat. Let's kill him. And then they sold him into slavery, and that's how the Exodus started, right? He was sold into slavery in Egypt. We ended up going to Egypt, and so on and so forth. One thing led to another. So it's interesting. When his coat was given to him by his father, Yaakov, how does it describe the coat? I'll just move right over here. Right? How does it describe the coat? Yeah, thank you. It says, but what's the Hebrew? It says ketonet pasim. Ketonet pasim. Now, if you look at Rashi, pasim, Rashi says, pasim, he says the only similar expression to pasim is karpas from the scroll of Esther. So Rashi links ketonet pasim, the cloak of Joseph, the multicolored cloak of Joseph, called in the Torah ketonet pasim. He links it linguistically to the word karpas, a green garment in the scroll of Esther. Are you following? Right? You were following? I mean, listen, I've been cleaning an oven all day, and I've been breathing in fumes from all types of stuff, so I don't even know if I'm coherent. So just tell me if you don't understand. Okay. So in any case, that was the only fun part of actually. Anyway, but like this. So Rashi connects those two words, and that's fascinating. So one of our great commentaries, Rabbeinu Manoach, he says, what's normally the word in Hebrew for vegetable? Yerek. So why don't we say yerek? Kadesh, urchatz, yerek, yacha. It doesn't rhyme, but still. Yerek is vegetable. Why do we call it karpas? Why are we dipping it? Because when the brothers said to their father Jacob, when he said, where is Yosef? What did they say? They dipped the ketonet pasim into blood. And they said to their father, chaya ra'ah achalotu. He must have been attacked and eaten by an animal. So at the beginning of the Seder, we remind ourselves, we dip vegetable, but we don't call it vegetable. What do we call it? Karpas. Ketonet pasim. Karpasu tchelet. We remind ourselves and we dip it into salt water. We remind ourselves that the first time something called karpas was dipped, it was not so good. We remind ourselves of the hatred and the jealousy and the competition that caused the descent to Egypt. So that at the beginning of the Seder, we are there to remind ourselves how we can correct the Exodus, how we can correct the exile. It's a reminder of hatred, a reminder of the jealousy, and a reminder of the plotting of the brothers against their brother Joseph. Are we following? So what do we see so far in the Exodus, in the whole idea of Pesach? First of all, number one, in the Code of Jewish Law, we see a special law, collect money for people on Pesach who need it. Number two, we start the whole meal with something in which we say, anyone who's hungry, come and eat. Anyone who needs, come and join us. Number three, We begin the meal by reminding ourselves of hatred and jealousy between brothers, which resulted in us going to Egypt by dipping karpas into salt water. Number 4, we see throughout the Bible, throughout the Torah, the prophets and the writings, when is the Exodus mentioned? It's mentioned regarding justice, charity, care for the oppressed, care for the poor, care for the disadvantaged, etc., etc. So what does this tell me that the central message of Pesach is? What it seems to be telling me is that the central message of Pesach is that I should ensure that no one is in Egypt. Whether it be the physical Egypt, the spiritual Egypt, whether it be, everyone has their own Egypts and their own exiles. And that's why God introduces himself to the Jewish people as, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. Because we are supposed to imitate God. We are supposed to be like God. So if God is introducing himself to us as God who created the universe, I cannot imitate God in that. I cannot create a universe. I have tried. Unsuccessfully. Right? I cannot create a planet. I can't create anything. Something from nothing, beyond me. None of us can do that. We cannot create. But, so God says, I am God who took you out of Egypt. Can we imitate God in being someone who redeems someone from Egypt? That we can do. We can actually do that. We can imitate God in helping people. We can imitate God in redemption. We can imitate God in bringing people up out of poverty. We can imitate God. That's where we can imitate him. So that's why he introduces himself to us in that way, so that we can be like him. So I think, if I would boil it down, I would probably say that the central message of the Exodus is really the pursuit of oneness with other people, would be a central idea. Oneness with God and oneness within ourselves. Let me explain. I've just given you examples of oneness with other people. How about, there's unifying with other people, especially those who are disadvantaged, especially those who don't have the opportunity for unification with anyone. But what about with God? So we also know there's the Passover offering. The Korban Pesach. We don't do the Passover offering anymore because we don't have the temple in Jerusalem. But we used to bring a Passover offering. The Passover offering was a very central, probably the most central feature of the celebration of Pesach. And what does the Passover offering symbolize? It is the absolute rejection of polytheism, the rejection of idolatry, the rejection of avodah zarah. Polytheism, poly, many, theos, gods, polytheism, many gods that the Egyptians believed in. We were discussing this at our Shabbat table. One of my kids said, "Is that where politics comes from?" I said, go on. He said, well, poly means many, ticks are small blood-sucking parasites. So politics, I said, excellent, this is where etymology and entomology meet. It's very good. Right, so anyway, but the Jewish people, because the Egyptians, one of the gods of the Egyptians was known as Khnum. The ram god Khnum had the head of a ram, the body of a human being. He was the god of the first cataract of the Nile. And therefore, there was a certain veneration for sheep, for the ram, because represented that god. So can you imagine for the Jewish people to take an Egyptian god with a small g and to slaughter it and to roast it whole on a spit, on a barbecue? Can you imagine the courage it took for the Jewish people to do that? Can you imagine the level of trust in God and belief? I mean, that's to break. You have to break out of your slave mentality of 210 years of slave mentality. You have to break out of your ideological enslavement to the Egyptians. That is rough. And it was specifically roasted whole on a spit. So if the Egyptians are walking around, you've got Ikhnaten and Amenhotep, they're walking around, dude, right? That's how Egyptians walked, right? Yeah. So yeah, family photo. Right, that's all. So anyway, so these two Egyptians are walking along, and one of them says, dude, what's that smell? And they said, oh, it's coming from the Goldbergs. And they walk over to the Goldbergs' house, And they look over there and they see the lamb on a spit. And he says, "Oh my God," right there on the barbecue. Right? So really, the Passover offering is a rejection of the whole system of Egyptian polytheism. The rejection of the Egyptian belief in multiple gods. It's the belief in one God, one God. So it is also the seeking of unity between the human and God. I would say that this idea of oneness, of unity, is, I think, at the core of Judaism in general. Not just the Exodus, but the core of Judaism. Think about it, and I'll give you some examples of this. First of all, sociologically. We all know, you're probably familiar with the phenomenon of bageling. Bageling is a verb. You know, I bageled you, you bageled me. Anyone? You've been bageled? You haven't been bageled? Okay. Bageling is the following phenomenon. If you look Jewish, obviously Jewish, like myself, and someone who is Jewish, but not obviously Jewish looking, comes within approximately 4 feet of you, they will be overwhelmed with an incredible urge to identify themselves to you as a Jew by uttering some random phrase in Hebrew, Yiddish, or etc. Right? You ever had that phenomenon? I'll give you an example. I was in Hungary with a group of students in Vati Utska. It's a street in the middle of Budapest. Walking along, a fellow comes over to him and he says, "Excuse me, do you know the way to the open air market?" And I said, "Sure. Go to the end of this street, make a left towards Dahani, and then you'll see it on the right." He says, "Thanks very much. Wouldn't want to be wandering around for 40 years like last time." What was that? That was a bagel. He was bageling me. He was saying, "I'm Jewish." I was standing at Newark Airport. I was going to Dallas for a Shabbaton. It was Friday morning, 9 o'clock flight, Friday morning. In front of me was standing a genuine cowboy. He had a Stetson. He had jeans, like the whole cowboy shirt, the boots, the whole works. He was like 6'4" or something like that. I'm standing. I can't see around him. It was like and they announced that the flight was delayed half an hour. I said, "Oh." And he turns around, he says, "Hope we make it by Shabbos." Clearly a bagel. The phenomenon of bageling is the desire of one Jew to make contact, to become one with another Jew. They just don't want to say, it's not, you don't just say, "Hello, I am Jewish." That's like, right? So you have to say something, right? Some random phrase or Good Shabbos or something like that, so to identify as a Jew. That's because the human soul craves oneness. Another example of this, heard from my friend Rabbi Feldheim. People go to sports games. You Americans go to American football, right? Beyond me why that's, okay, whatever, anyway. So you go to an American football game where they have all, it's 4 hours. Of the 4 hours, only half an hour are actually moving. And of that half an hour, there's a lot of committee meetings on field. I'm not exactly sure what they're doing, but okay. You're sitting in a freezing cold stadium, surrounded by Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons, in other words, Jets fans, and it's unbelievable, right? Yeah, sorry, we'll take that outside later. So basically, why do people do this? I asked some friends who go to these I wouldn't call them friends, but I asked some people I know who go to football games, and they said it's not the football. It's the feeling of 50,000 people screaming together. Jets, 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 Jets. Thank God for them, it's not more complex spelling, because there's no way. Right? So, but again, it's not just the football. It is really the phenomenon of what? A feeling of unity with 50,000 people. Let's move from sociology to science. We find a similar idea in science. That is to say, science very often pursues the oneness, meaning the thread that ties things together. Phenomenon A, B, and C. And I have one explanation. I can either say, well, this is because of that, this is because of that, this is because of that, 3 separate explanations, or I can give one explanation that links the 3 phenomena together. Which is better? Which is better? The one which will link all of them together. That is how science makes progress. You look at the dots on the chart, you find the line, the algorithm that connects them. You see there's a tsunami, there's an earthquake, there's a volcano erupting. Some pagan would say that's because of the volcano god, the earthquake god, and the sea god. What will the scientists say? Tectonic plate activity. Right? That's what it is. They're all part, right? You know what tectonic plates are, right? Don't make me explain, right? I can go back to the beginning. First, the earth cooled. But no, but you see, they're all linked. A scientist sees those as linked. The quest of science is a quest for oneness, for seeking unity. We seek unity between one person and another. We seek unity between phenomena. We seek unity between us and God. The human being craves to transcend beyond this world and to try to make contact with our source. The soul, described in the book of Job, slightly out of context, but as Chelek Elokah Mima'al, the Tanya cites that, a portion of God above. The idea that the soul wants to get back to its source, which is God. That is why, you think about it, you ever look, people have opened up the Torah, you open up the book of Bereshit, with what letter does the Torah start? Base. Bait. I mean, I would think symbolically, if I was writing the Torah, something I've thought of, but if I was writing the Torah, I would have started it with an aleph, not a bait. Why does it start with a bait? That's the second letter. Start with an aleph. God couldn't have figured out a way to start the Torah with an aleph. You know, what's so hard? So I think the answer is, and you know, Maharal alludes to this idea, the answer is the following, that creation of a physical world, in a sense, is a type of an exile. It's the creation of plurality. It's the creation of division. Now there's a physical creation, a physical world. There's God and us. There's us and them. There's you and me. There's body and soul. There's all types of divisions. Bait, the letter 2. In other words, I would say there is now two-ness. I don't mean two-ness in North Africa. I mean two-ness with a W, two-ness. Right? There is two-ness. And God is absolute oneness. God is Aleph. Bait is two-ness. So what is our job in this world? To go back from the bait to the Aleph. To go from the bait to the Aleph. Whether the bait, the two-ness, is within ourselves, which is in slavery. Slavery, by the way, is two-ness. Because slavery means I cannot be true to myself. I have to obey someone else. So within myself, I can't say what I want. I can't say what I think. I cannot do what I want, etc. In other words, there's a lack of unity between thought, speech, and action. And I am under the control of another. I'm not one with myself. Slavery of Egypt. It is the polytheism of Egypt, is two-ness, meaning multiple gods, the ram god, and Isis and Osiris, and all the various gods of Egypt, etc. And our job is to get back from the bait to the aleph, there as well. And as all the sources I mentioned at the beginning of my speech, we speak about the oneness between others, one person and another. Whether it's inviting the poor, whether it's supplying them with kimcha, the pischa, the flour for Pesach, all of those situations are all situations where we're trying to get from a bait back to an aleph. Whether the bait is relationship with God, with self, and with other, and that's really kol haTorah kula. And that is how, in a very famous story, Sage Hillel was approached by a non-Jew. And a non-Jew asked him, first of all, he went to Shammai, and he said to Shammai, I would like to convert to Judaism. And Shammai said, yeah, no worries, mate. And he said, however, I would like you to teach me the Torah while standing on one foot. So Shammai threw him out, which is what I would do. However, Hillel did not do that. The guy came to Hillel. Hillel said, yep, I can do that. So Hillel said to him, Ma da'aleich sanei, that which is hateful unto you, l'chavreich lo ta'avid, don't do to your friend. That which is hateful unto you, don't do it. He says that is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and study. Now, most people are familiar with the first part of the statement, right? Which is, that which is hateful to you, don't do unto your friend. But Hillel didn't stop there. He said the rest is commentary, go and learn. How is the rest of the Torah commentary on that statement? How is don't eat bread on Pesach a commentary on that which is hateful unto you, don't do unto your friend? How is don't eat lobster a commentary on that which is hateful unto you, don't do unto your friend, unless your friend is a lobster? How is keeping Shabbat a commentary on that which is hateful unto you, don't do unto you? How is that I don't get that. So I think Rashi gives us a hint. Rashi tells us that friend should not be understood in a very limited way, my fellow human. He says God is also called our friend. Re'echa v're'a avicha, your friend, your beloved, and the friend of your father. Yedid nefesh, we call God Yedid nefesh. What does Yedid mean? A beloved, a friend. Yedid is two hands, yad, yad, someone you embrace with both hands. A student, sometimes you push away with the left, draw close with the right. A friend, it's Yedid, yad, yad in Hebrew, embrace with both hands. There's no pushing away whatsoever. God is called our Yedid. He embraces us with both hands, so to speak. So God is our friend. Rabbi Mordechai Chaim Luzzatto says, you know who your closest friend is? Your own soul. So now we have three friends. God, fellow human being, and my own soul. That is what Hillel is saying. That which is hateful unto you, don't do unto your friend. Right? Your friend, God, your friend, other people, your friend, your soul. That's the whole Torah. The rest is commentary, go and learn. That really is the whole Torah. And I think that encapsulates the idea of Pesach. Pesach is about going from the Beit back to the Aleph, going from exile, which is plurality, which is two-ness, which is separation, separation from others, separation from God, separation from ourselves, slavery, etc., and to go back to the Aleph, which is the oneness and the unity. And that's why on Pesach we have the emphasis on collecting money for other people, on inviting people for the Seder, on dipping the karpas, reminding ourselves of the hatred of the brothers for Yosef and the sale of Joseph, and reminding ourselves of those things. That's really, I think, the central message. And that is why when God introduces himself to the Jews, to the world, to humanity, he says, I am God who took you out of, he doesn't say created the world, universe, space, time, press the button on the Big Bang. No, he says, I am God who took you out of Egypt, because each one of us has the ability to take something out of Egypt, whether it's ourselves, our soul, whether it's someone else in their personal Egypt. And indeed, to perform that redemption is something we can do. That's what God wants us to imitate him in that central idea. And I think that's, at least in my understanding, I'm usually right. So, but my understanding is that that is the central meaning of the Exodus. That's the central message of the Exodus, to get from the Beit back to the Aleph, and to hope to achieve that. When we do achieve that, when everyone else has redeemed themselves from their own individual Mitzrayim, Egypt, and others from their Egypt, then, God willing, Hashem will bring all of us out of the actual exile, and we'll be able to rejoice, bring the Passover offering, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, and to have next year in Jerusalem.